Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Matt Dixon, who is a best-selling author and also founding partner of DCM Insights. Hey, Matt, how are you doing?
Hey, Adrian, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, I must say, Matt, I know your work, like your work, respect your work, fan of your work. We've been, as you kind of were talking before, we've circling the same drain for probably a number of kind of years. I did like that analogy as being a drain. I'm not sure that's a good thing. It depends on kind of how you approach it, but
eventually get flushed down it, right?
Well, there's all sorts of stuff that go down the drain. It's like I'm maybe circling the same vortex. There's another one.
There you go.
A different kind of way of looking at it. So I know of your work, and I was really excited to have the opportunity for you to come on the podcast and have a chat, because you've got a new book out, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But for the benefit of the people that don't know you or not familiar with your work, can you give us a thumbnail sketch on Matt Dixon? Yeah,
sure. So I think it's interesting. I spent most of my career at a company called CEB, which is think of it as a for-profit think tank. So we did research for different parts of companies. So I ran the research programs for the majority of my time there. I ran the research programs that served CX and customer contact, customer service leaders, as well as the programs that served B2B sales leaders. So I kind of, it's interesting. My research background sort of has gone down two different paths. So I think on the one hand, many of the Punk CX listeners will know the effortless experience and some of the research around customer effort, the customer effort score, things like that. That all came out of the CX customer care, customer service practice. If we were talking to a sales audience, they would be more familiar with the work around the challenger sale, for instance. And then, of course, our new book coming out is more focused on the sales side. But, as you and I think both know, there's quite a lot of bleed between CX and sales. The sales experience for many of our customers, especially in business to business, is the first part of the customer experience.
Yeah, of course.
But
you kind of, as you alluded to, so you talked about the effortless experience, which is the precursor, the thing around the kind of customer effort score and all the work that you did at CEB. And then also before that, there was the challenger sale, which is, as you say, very much in the sales domain. But this. Now, you recently published, as you alluded to, a new book called The Jolt Effect, and how high performers overcome customer indecision. Oh my God, indecision. So tell me why you wrote it, and what's its main thesis and sort of the main sort of don't tell us just the main headlines, all of the headlines, because we want people to buy the book, obviously. But tell us kind of where it came from and why you wrote it.
Yeah, sure. The where it came from was interesting. So we, as sales researchers, myself and my colleagues, my co-author Ted McKenna, he and I had always been big fans of Professor Neil Rackham's work. If you remember way back in
spin selling,
yeah. And Professor Rackham was quite famous for the research methodology his team used. They had a team of about a dozen people. They spent almost a decade physically sitting in on almost 30,000 sales conversations. And from that, he was a psychologist by training, as was his team. And so from that research, they distilled the findings that eventually went into spin selling. And that kind of, being there where the rubber hits the road type of research is what I'd always aspired to do in sales, but I could never get anybody to pay for it. So, but that all changed in March of 2020 because, as you remember, the world of sales went virtual overnight. Zoom and Teams and virtual had been kind of on a slow march in B2B sales, but suddenly the switch was flipped. And every single sales conversation, both the mundane conversations and the really critical closing calls and negotiation calls and consensus building calls, all happened virtually. So we actually saw this as an opportunity to study sales in a completely new way. So we worked with several dozen companies and collected about 2.5 million recorded sales conversations from more transactional sales, but also very complex solution sales, B2B, true B2B solution sales. And we studied them using a machine learning platform. We transcribed all the call data and studied it using machine learning. And the question we were after, Adrian, on this project, in the Challengers there, those familiar with that book, that's really a story of how do you sell to a customer who learns on their own? Somebody who goes to the internet, goes to your website, does all their research, and then they call you and they want you to compete on price. We wrote a follow-on book called The Challenger Customer, which was about a different problem, which is, what do you do when more and more people show up at the buying committee? As your deal size goes up, more people want to get their eyes on it and weigh in and have a vote or a say on whether their company buys the product. This angle on this research was a little bit different. The problem we've been tracking for the last few years, and I think this is a problem that's going to get a lot worse in the coming few years, is the problem of customer indecision. So this is the customer who goes through the entire sales process and does nothing. And usually the way that ends up for the salesperson is they just get ghosted, or the customer stops showing up for demos and Zoom calls, and they offer only curt responses or no response to emails, texts, etc. And then eventually the sales rep says, this is closed, lost, there was no decision, nothing happened. And so what we found in our research is that anywhere between 40 and 60% of all deals are actually lost to the customer doing nothing.
Yeah.
And so we think this is going to get worse. And we think it's going to get worse, especially as the economy starts to, maybe hit the skids a little bit in the coming years. People get a lot more concerned about large expenditures, making big, bet the company kind of decisions. And customers will become much more prone to sort of sit on the sidelines and do nothing. It doesn't mean they'll stop consuming our time as salespeople, but what do we do? What do the best salespeople do to get their customers over the line? So that was the thesis that we're going after.
So I think that makes me think about some of the conversations I've had and the idea that people go quiet on you or indecision. I'm just like going, oh my God, I've had some of those things. And I had to develop my own way of dealing with those sort of things, which I sort of informally came up with this idea of like a 3 strikes and you're out sort of rule. Where the idea that you send something to somebody because you promised to send something to somebody, and then you do it, and then you wait for the kind of the response, and you go, okay, that's not right. Then you kind of follow up kind of one time, kind of say, just make sure you got this.
Yep.
Still get nothing. Okay, fine. I'm going to try and call them. And then it's like, okay, nothing. And then the third time is where you just go, I'm going to stop wasting your time because this is I'm taking it away from you. So it employs that kind of the childlike psychology sort of thing. You take something away from somebody,
scarcity, right?
To test whether they're interested or not. Because if they kind of still kind of like go quiet, you're like, well, that's fine, done. Yeah. But more often than not, by taking something away from somebody, it sort of catalyzes them into action, or at least they go, oh, I'm sorry, really busy, super busy, all that sort of stuff. And you're like going, aha, got you. Yeah. That's fine. Then it's great. Then you're like, oh, back on the radar. That's fine. And then it's like they feel there's almost this thing about reciprocity and stuff as well. They feel they're responsible to keep in touch and keep that kind of going and explain themselves.
Yeah.
So I get that indecision, but I mean, I'm dealing with smaller deals. You're talking about kind of often very, very big deals, but I'm more interested in because I think the thing that you did about by almost by extension, by Professor Brackham's work, by taking all of the digitally recorded calls and then being able to, transcribe them and analyze them and things and think about the kind of themes. I think that's kind of brilliant because it shows us the power of what we can do with technology, not just in sales, but just generally calls in general in and out of organizations.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is when people talk about data, that's kind of data in an unstructured kind of way. There's so much power.
Oh yeah.
There. And so I think it's a really interesting example of what we can do. But I wanted to dig into something you can said about because your research found that between 40 and 60% of deals today end up stalled in a no decision limbo. I mean, and I was a bit like, oh, that's a lot of waste. I mean, a lot of wasted effort.
Yeah. If you think about it from so whether you're a listener on the call as maybe a business owner or perhaps an individual salesperson or in some commercial role, and think about what that means for you personally. So that 40 to 60% of your time goes to customers who consume it endlessly, but end up doing nothing. Or if you're a business leader, you're listening to the recording, to the show, and think about the impact for your organization. I mean, it's just a massive deadweight loss. And, in sales, there's so much attention being paid, especially right now. I think there's so much noise out there. It's so hard to break through to customers and get time in front of them and schedule meetings and visits and demos and things like this. But, you're trying to feed the top of the funnel, but really your big problem is that 40 to 60% of the deals in your pipeline are just in this wasteland. And what's so interesting is that this is a problem primarily of average performing salespeople. So the biggest swing variable we found in the data, the average conversion rate across all of the sales we studied was 26%, the average win rate. But for high performing salespeople, it was closer to 60%. It was like 57%. And the biggest swing variable, the biggest explainer as to why one group finished so far ahead of the other was how those star salespeople dealt with what we call those cold feet moments in the sales conversation. So this is the moment where you start to detect the customer is starting to backpedal. They're starting to step away from the decision. They're showing signs of cold feet. They're hemming and hawing, wringing their hands, straddling the fence, whatever expression we want to use. But in sales, we're very familiar with this. And it happens a huge percentage of the time. We found in our study, 87% of customers display either moderate levels of those behaviors or high levels of those behaviors. The really decisive customers are like a needle in a haystack of indecision. If you could find them, great, you should sell to them all day long, but there aren't really enough out there. We all have to deal with this problem of indecision or indecisive customers. But the high performers have figured out a way to get those folks across the line. And the approach they use is actually, in many respects, the exact opposite of what the average performers pursue, who are, unbeknownst to them, actually making the problem worse.
Yeah. I mean, so before we get into that, in terms of the sales kind of person, I'm interested in understanding the sort of some of the roots of the indecision, as it were, because I think you found in your study that there's actually some common roots and some common biases that are kind of like problems that people face in organizations. And it's not just about the salespeople; it's also about the buyers and stuff as well. So, what do we can know about the kind of the buyers from your study, and what's stopping them or forcing that indecision kind of upon them? Because some people, it's not that people are just tire kickers.
No, absolutely not. And you put your finger on it, Adrian, which is, we talk a lot about customer centricity in sales. We talk about it in marketing. We talk about it in CX and service and all parts of the enterprise. But I think what you put your finger on, what really the high performers have figured out is it's not necessarily they figure out a better way to do what everyone else is already doing. They figured out a way to deeply understand why the customer is struggling to make a decision and have developed a totally different playbook for dealing with it. So it is really an approach rooted in what the customer is going through. And so when we looked at this, historically, maybe to take a step back, for at least the past 30, 40, 50 years in sales, the conventional wisdom has been, if the customer gets cold feet at any point in the sales process, there's only one logical explanation, and that's because you didn't beat the customer's status quo. Overcoming the status quo, beating the status quo has always been the singular enemy in sales. And so what happens when our customer shows signs of cold feet is that salespeople do one of two things. The first thing is they go back and they try to reconvince the customer of the merits of the decision. So, Adrian, you must have missed the point where I walked you through that feature, because it is really, really great. And like the ROI is going to be let me just.
You're like, sorry, but it's not about you.
I know. You must not have heard that. Did you hear me when I said it was 5 times faster than our competitor's solution? So we go back and we paint the rosy picture and try to show the customer how great things will be on the other side of the decision. And when the carrot doesn't work, what salespeople do is they put away the carrot and they break out the stick, and they use what's called FUD technique. So FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do is basically scare the customer into action. And we try to paint this sort of apocryphal picture of what might happen if they do nothing. They create that burning platform. Adrian, these problems are not going to solve themselves. And you told me that you're losing ground to your competitors. And you mentioned that your employees hate you for making them use that terrible, homegrown system they use today. You've got no choice but to move forward. So you try to dial up this fear of missing out. But it turns out it's not the fear of missing out that's keeping the customer from moving forward. It's their fear of messing up.
Yeah.
And so what we found is preference for the status quo, turns out, accounts for it's less than half of all the losses to no decision. The bigger chunk of losses to no decision are not because the customer prefers their status quo. It's not because they think what they do today is good enough. It's not because they don't believe you that your solution is superior. It's not that they don't believe that the change journey is worth it, or as we say, the juice is worth the squeeze. It's that they're worried about making a big mistake. And when we unpack that, these indecision sources about these fears of messing up, it comes down to 3 specific things. The first one is, Adrian, I'm with you. Our status quo stinks. I love what you guys are talking about, but you've walked me through a lot of options. You've got a roadmap packed with different capabilities. You've got all these partner integrations. I could buy the premium version of your product, the basic version. I could roll it out enterprise-wide. I could roll it out in a very narrow deployment. I could add the professional services or not. I could go for a 2-year contract, a 3-year contract, a 4-year contract. There's so many options, and I'm worried about picking the wrong one because they all look good to me. So that's called the valuation problem. The second one is a lack of information. So this is when the customer says, this is a new space for us. We've never purchased a technology like this. We have a homegrown system where we've never had any piece of software or solution that did that. So we really want to do our research. And there's so much information out there. The amount of information is just growing exponentially every single day. And I don't feel like I'm smart enough about this space to make a good purchase decision. So that's the second source, is a lack of information. And the third one is called outcome uncertainty. This is where the customer feels like before they sign on the dotted line that they have no assurance of success. So their fear is in that moment, the pilot we ran with your company was wonderful. The reference calls, your customers love you. You scored high in the Gartner Magic Quadrant or the Forrester Wave or whatever the analyst report was. Everyone in my LinkedIn network loves you guys. But what if we are the one company that this doesn't work out for, and this whole thing goes sideways? And if that happens, somebody's going to get fired. And the person who gets fired first is the person whose name is on the contract. And that's me. As we say in the book, like nobody ever got fired for maintaining the status quo, but people do get fired for trying to change it and having it blow up in their face. So those 3 things, what's so interesting is those 3 things, those sources of indecision, have nothing to do with the status quo. So you could easily have a customer who agrees the status quo is suboptimal, agrees your solution is far superior, wants to move forward with you, but still can't make a decision because they're worried about messing up, picking the wrong thing, they haven't done enough homework, or they might be left holding the bag, right? No assurance of success. Now, the average salesperson, when the customer starts to waver and waffle and backpedal, what they do is they break out their status quo hammer. Every indecisive customer for the average salesperson looks like a nail, and they have this one hammer and they just beat them to death. Mm-hmm. What we found in the research is that actually backfires more often than not. There's an 84% probability that they'll actually make the customer more indecisive. Why? Because chances are the customer's not preferring the status quo. They're struggling with one of these other things. And when you just use fear to try to scare the customer into action, you just give them more to be worried about, and they end up doing nothing. So,
it's also that kind of the thing is like it seems to be a natural thing. It's like, people might not call it this way, but people understand that if you feel like you're going to get bullied into something, then what do? You're going to dig your heels in and go,
yeah,
no comment.
Yeah, that's right. That's 100% right. It's a bad sales technique, but it's born of this belief, I think, that there is no other explanation for why a customer would do nothing. It is only because you haven't demonstrated the value. It's only because they believe their status quo is good enough. And so you've got to put that to bed before you can move forward. But again, it's I think by looking at this massive data set, and then we also, to try to explain this, we delved into like 30 or 40 years of human psychology and cognitive psychology, behavioral economics research, which I wouldn't wish on any of your listeners, but there's some fascinating stuff in there, and it helps us understand, even as human beings, there are two types. We all know we're wired to avoid loss, right? That's the Daniel Kahneman prospect theory, thinking fast and slow kind of thesis, right? Humans want to avoid loss more than they want to maximize gain. But there are two types of loss. The first one is an error of omission. That's a loss that occurs when we do nothing, when we don't take action, loss from inaction. And then there's an error of commission, which is loss that occurs from action. It's a direct result of an action we took. Given two scenarios, every single human on earth would prefer an error of omission when loss occurs from doing nothing to an error of commission. We don't want to be personally culpable or responsible for doing something that leads to a loss, which is why these customers kind of sit on the fence and do nothing.
So I wonder if that is linked to, you get these kind of like the top 10 list of phobias, things that people are afraid of. And like, what is it? Arachnophobia is kind of up there, number one.
Why? I don't know.
Like, and then apparently so. And then number two is social phobia. And it's not just the fear of kind of like what we do, but it's also kind of the external sort of thing about what other people think about
how
what
we're perceived. That's right. Nobody wants to be made to look like a fool, right? Nobody wants to. We can't stand the idea of spending a lot of our company's money on a solution and having a lot of our colleagues say, "Boy, you really messed up when it came to configuring this," or "You bought the wrong thing. We should have gotten the premium version. We shouldn't have signed up for a 3-year contract. We should have rolled this out in a narrow way, trying to make everyone use it." Or we didn't do enough research, and now we're realizing all the things we should have learned had we done a little bit more research. Or this was a huge bet and we didn't get the ROI, and you got no guarantee of success from the vendor. So it's on you. Like, we can't stand that idea of people perceiving us that way.
But it becomes like this kind of making a mistake squared, right? So you've got it yourself, your own conscience, going like, shit, that was on me. And then there's everybody else around you kind of going, that's on you. And it's like, it just layers it on. And so you can get it. And if you don't get that dynamic as a salesperson, understand that this is kind of going on, then it's like all you're going to end up doing is be guilty of trying to bully somebody into make a decision, and they're just going to put more and more distance between you and the person you're having a conversation with.
Yeah, that's right. And, so what it comes down to, I think, is if we were to summarize, what we found. So the first piece of the book is really about what's going on, the difference between preferring the status quo and being indecisive about changing it, and what drives that indecision, what are these fears, and why do they have so much power over us and such a grip on us as people and as customers. The second part of the book, we really go into, okay, so what do high performers do differently? And if I were to summarize, what I would say is, we talked about before, the average salesperson has a beat the status quo hammer, and every indecisive customer looks like a nail. Beating the status quo is important. We've got to do that, or we won't sell anything. If the customer believes what they do today is fine, there's no way you're going to sell them anything. So you've got to do that first. And salespeople are good at that. They've been taught to do that, trained to do that. In the Challenger sale, we wrote about that. That was really what the book was about. And that is really about dialing up the fear of not purchasing, to show the customer the cost of their inaction, the error of omission they might make. But again, we talked about before, their bigger fear is the error of commission. It's the fear of not missing out. It's the fear of messing up.
Yeah.
Overcoming indecision, this JOLT playbook we write about in the book, is all about dialing down the fear of purchasing.
Right.
So, and we've got to be able as salespeople to toggle from one to the other. Once we put the status quo to bed and defeated it, now that preference for the status quo recedes from the customer's mind, but what starts to occupy them is their fear of messing up. And it's that social fear you talk about. It's not just messing up, it's how I'll be perceived by everyone else in my organization, or even if I'm an individual consumer, how my family or my spouse might perceive me for making this purchase decision on behalf of our family. and not having done enough research or picking the wrong thing or getting no guarantee of success. I'll be made to look like a fool and I'll be to blame. So.
And that's kind of what you talk about, kind of these high performing salespeople that do these different things. And that's the jolt, right? That's kind of like, which I thought was really kind of like, it's an acronym, ladies and gentlemen, kind of like, sort of, funnily enough. That's kind
also borrowed from Professor Rackham. I thought he did a good job of that.
There you go. It's like jolting somebody out of their inertia, their kind of indecision thing. So, I mean, tell me about that and what they do and how they do it, sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I like, we thought it spoke to what's happening. Like you're jolting your customer out of their indecisive state. They're stuck, right? And we're trying to get them moving forward. But it also is an acronym. So the 4 steps of the JOLT framework are 1, and you hit on this earlier. The first one is judge the level of indecision. And so you, when you were talking about that, those trial balloons you float to one of your customers, right? First it's the outreach, then it's the, hey, did you see this? Then it's a, hey, are you really? And then it's a, sounds like you're not interested. I'm going to take this away. That is a great way for judging the level of indecision, And what's the problem there is that most average salespeople, for the average salesperson, if the customer hasn't said no, then there's a chance they might say yes. But as you know, your time is limited and it's a scarce resource, and you can't afford to chase, garbage trucks. And so you've got to be careful with your time, and you've got to be able to distill and sense, sometimes just through listening, sometimes by doing what you're doing, which is sort of sending like a surface ship pinging for a submarine in the depths and listening for the echo.
Really good. Are you still here? Hello?
Yeah, you're still there. Exactly, right? But you're kind of pinging and listening for that echo. And then off of that, you can distill, is this an opportunity worth my time? So the first one, judging the level of indecision. Everything starts there because it tells us, is this worth our time? It tells us how to forecast that opportunity. And it tells us if they are indecisive, can they be saved? And what do we need to do differently to get them over the finish line? So the next 3 are, offer your recommendation. What we know from a lot of the social science research is that offering lots of options and choices is a wonderful thing for the customer when they're shopping, when they're window shopping, when they're thinking about who do I want to talk to, when they're doing, visiting the trade show booth, when they're seeing the vendor presentation, the early demos, let 1,000 flowers bloom. But at some point, when everything starts to look equally good and attractive, those customers will end up doing nothing because they don't want to make a mistake and pick the wrong thing. So we've got to chalk the field, narrow up the consideration set, and then offer our personal recommendation. So we've got to go from many to few to the one thing we want them to do and put our seal of approval on it. The L is limiting the exploration. So customers, there's so much information out there, and there's this natural information asymmetry that exists between a customer and a salesperson. The salesperson always knows more than the customer. They know where the bodies are buried. They know where the pitfalls are. They know all the customers that hate you. They know all this, the bad stuff. And they don't share that with customers willingly. And customers know that, right? So the customer wants to be as much of an expert as the salesperson, but they'll never achieve that level of expertise because they have a day job and it's not to be an expert in our product or technology. But they will want to try and they will consume endless information. So we've got to work hard to get them to see us as a trusted expert, right? To not want to be an expert themselves, but to see us as a trusted expert. And there are a few different dimensions to that. Part of that is the trust piece, right? If they think we're trying to put one over on them, they're going to go do their own research because we're not a trustworthy partner. And the second part is the expertise. If they see us as just a glorified admin, if all I do is my only benefit to the customer is getting Adrian on the phone because Adrian knows all the answers to the complex questions, I get delegated down to the person I sound like. So I've got to myself be an expert and demonstrate that expertise for my customer. And by doing that, they will shift from I need to be an expert to you are my expert. And I trust that you're going to guide me to the best answer possible. And then the T, taking risk off the table. In the 11th hour, I like to describe the gap between the tip of the customer's pen and the contract is filled with outcome uncertainty. It's that fear that I might not get what I'm paying for. And this, especially, and that goes up as the economy tightens and companies get more conservative. It goes up as deal sizes go up, as those decisions become really important. Time pressure goes up. All of that is filled with outcome uncertainty. And what we need to do as salespeople is de-risk the purchase for the customer. That comes in both formal ways of, there could be opt-out clauses or prorated refund windows or that the customer could take advantage of, but also informal ways. assigning an executive sponsor, or getting that customer who hasn't yet signed on the phone with our customer success team, and having the customer success team start to paint the picture of how we're going to get value. It starts to create this feeling for the customer, oh, these guys know what they're doing. There is a safety net here. I'm not jumping off a cliff with no safety net. There is one. And these guys are going to make sure nothing goes wrong. They've been there before. They know what the pitfalls are. I'm in good hands. And I don't feel like I'm going to be made to look a fool if this goes sideways. So Jolt, those are the 4 behaviors. And again, we like it because it's memorable and it's also says what it's doing. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's kind of brilliant. I mean, and I think you referred to it earlier. There's just kind of like for my reference and for the listeners kind of reference is like the payoff. If you do this sort of like stuff, the difference between average and the top performers, it's kind of what sort of like win rate are we talking about here? What's the difference?
Yeah, it's huge. So one of the things we did was we charted customers by level of indecision. So from low indecision, so those are your decisive customers, to moderate levels of indecision, high levels of indecision. Now, I mentioned earlier, turns out 87% of customers are either moderately indecisive or highly indecisive. So the decisive customers are a rarity, unfortunately, in sales. So if we know that 87% of the world is moderately or highly indecisive, that's kind of where we're really spending the bulk of our time in sales. But if you look at the decisive customers, when you're dealing with a decisive customer, everybody is good at sales, even people like me who just write about sales. So with that decisive customer, an average performer will convert. Remember, the average across the entire study was 26%. But with decisive customers, everybody does pretty well. Your average performing salespeople convert above average at 39%. Your high performers converted almost 70%. Now, again, the bulk of our time is with those moderately indecisive and highly indecisive customers. Look at the moderately indecisive. For those, again, average win rate's 26%, and that is exactly what the average performer converts at, 26% win rate with moderately indecisive customers. However, high performers convert at 58%. So 58% conversion rate with even those moderately indecisive customers. And then if you look at the deeply indecisive, recalcitrant, kind of not cold feet, but blocks of ice around their feet kind of customers who literally cannot move forward, those deeply indecisive customers, things really fall apart for the average performer. They convert only at 6%. So it's like throwing a dart blindfolded at a dartboard. Your high performers, with the average 26% across the board, they still convert at 31% with those deeply indecisive customers. So they actually convert above average even with the most indecisive customers. So there's a night and day difference across all levels of indecision. And when you think about that as a salesperson, a business owner, a leader, that 40 to 60% of your deals are being lost to no decision. And there's a playbook that is a customer-centric playbook. It's about getting our customers comfortable that they're not going to be made to look like a fool.
Yeah.
You don't need to be fearful. They're not going to mess up. There is a playbook, and it can produce that kind of differential. We should focus a little bit less on generating more leads and a little bit more on trying to unstick a lot of our stuck deals.
I think so. I mean, if you think about it that way, I mean, it just reminded me of something, you think about some of the e-commerce conversion rates and kind of cart abandonment rates and things. There's so much waste that goes through kind of like the businesses. And if you just kind of went, tweak, and all these different, it's like, like the growth is all there on the table.
Yeah.
It's just need to kind of get better, get better at some of these kind of like things. And so, but I know also kind of like the thing which I thought was brilliant is that this is doesn't just apply to building new relationships and sales, but it also has an application when it comes to customer experience and kind of loyalty. And I thought, so it's a bigger sort of thing because it feels like it's a bigger thing as well. So tell me how the Jolt effect applies in those sort of areas.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, one of the things that we know in sales is that there are times when we can get a customer who is fearful, who is experiencing indecision. We can get them to commit, but then bad things happen after the ink is kind of dry on the contract. They start to regret that decision. In some cases, we'll start to backtrack from the decision and try to get out of the decision. So this leads to churn, attrition, just difficult post-sale experiences with customers who feel like they were oversold or feel like they signed and they shouldn't have, and are just trying to squirm out of and weasel out of the agreement or what have you. So bad things happen quite literally from a financial perspective for that customer, even post-sale. Indecision is something that lingers even after the decision is made, which sounds counterintuitive, but it can stay with us for a long time, these fears. And for that fearful customer, they're looking for evidence even after they're making the decision that they made a mistake. I should have done more homework. I picked the wrong thing. I should have asked for more assurance of successes, more of a safety net. And again, it can lead to bad outcomes for us as a company. Now, what we know is this Jolt playbook. We took a little bit of a page out of the effortless experience, and we tried to understand when a Jolt seller uses those Jolt tactics with a customer and is able to dial down the fear of purchasing compared to what the average seller does, what does it do to the customer's level of effort? And what we found was when a customer is engaged with a Jolt seller, somebody using these techniques to de-risk the purchase, to limit the expiration, to offering a recommendation, getting the customer comfortable, they're not going to make a huge mistake. It is also an easier sales experience for the customer, and it leads to less post-sale churn, regret, backtracking, all the things we want to avoid in sales. So there is a longer tail. This is not just a sales story. You're 100% right. There's a much longer tail that starts to bring us into customer loyalty and in building a stable, growing, thriving business with excited customers who are ready to engage and get value from our products and services.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of that. I mean, that's a great point. And I also going to think that what we also kind of find is that, and we also forget in that whole broader sort of experience space, is that sales is an essential part of a customer's experience, right? And often we don't think about it. We think about that actually that experience starts when somebody lands on your website or picks up the phone to you or whatever. You're like, no, there's a big chunk of things and it's a relationship building thing.
Yeah.
And it's about getting to know you, and it's that initial dance and things. And so it's an essential part, and there's real wisdom and truth in the idea that first impressions, however long they matter. Yep. They absolutely matter. And how you start will say a lot about how you can, how you continue along your journey and your relationship with those customers. But Matt, thank you for that. I would definitely say that people should definitely go out and buy the book, not just for the sales sort of things, because also internally, if you took sales in inverted commas and selling ideas within organizations and stuff, getting things approved and getting things supported and invested in and funded and all these different things, there's something to be learned about the whole Jolt approach.
Yeah, indecision, you're quite right. Indecision is not a sales problem or a sales rep to customer thing. It's a human thing. It's something we all struggle with. And you're right. It's, as Dan Pink said, to sell is human. We're all in sales in some respect, whether we actually are salespeople or whether you're a CX manager trying to sell something to the chief customer officer or to a business unit or line partner. We're selling ideas. We're trying to sway and influence people. And I think you're right. There's a lot that can be gleaned from this around why it's hard to get people to make a decision, get them to move forward. Again, what informed our research was decades of human psychology and behavioral economics research, which actually had nothing to do with sales. It was just, why do students struggle to pick college courses? When signing up for the semester or for the university year, why do partners struggle to make a decision on purchasing a home or a car? These are human problems. Why do we struggle to place an order in a restaurant? So,
well, so I mean that's brilliant. So that hopefully we've kind of given people a flavor of the book and what it's about and stuff. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we kind of like ask you a couple of kind of like wrap up kind of questions?
Yeah. No, I mean, the only other thing is that if listeners want to learn more about the research and we've got some additional resources. And then I think for business owners and leaders in sales who are interested in like, hey, how do I get my customers using this Jolt playbook or my salespeople using this Jolt playbook with our customers? Go visit jolteffect.com. That's where the book website. And there's a whole bunch of information on there, free resources, et cetera. And you can learn more about the authors, the research, the background, a lot of the things we talked about today.
Awesome. I mean, I'll make sure that that's jolteffect.com. We'll kind of put that in the kind of the highlights that we write up. So a couple of quick questions before we kind of go. Let's try and make them quick fire so then we don't kind of like run out of time. But so we've been coming out of what I've I'm calling the pandemic years. I'm doing air quotes on an audio broadcast. Go figure. And I want to know some of the biggest lessons that you've learned and how that's going to inform how you do things going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this recently, Adrian, especially in light of the fact that, Effortless Experience is almost 10 years old now and came out in 2013. And I'm thinking about, were we to rewrite that book today? I think there are evergreen themes there, but there are some things that are different. I think in the pandemic, I think in many respects, shot some of the things we were already doing through a tunnel of time. So it really kind of fast forwarded a lot of the things that were already happening. So for instance, technology adoption for self-service by customers really took a huge quantum leap into the future just in the span of a couple of years. Customers calling up and not wanting to wait 3 hours to talk to a rep saying, okay, you know what? I will go to the website. I will try this on the app. I will give it a go. Then in the knock-on implications for our people, what that means is the easy stuff goes away. What's left is more complicated. And think about how hard life is for our representatives working at home with dogs and kids and contractors and spouses working in the other side of the room and who also have jobs. It's quite difficult. And they lack now the support, physical support of their peers. Somebody you can tap on the shoulder and say, boy, I got a request from a customer I've never had before. Can you help me out? It's lonely out there. And it's a really tough environment with very demanding customers who don't appreciate that or recognize that. And so I think moving forward, I think one of the big lessons is, and especially as we head into this downturn, you'll find the average companies will cut training and development and all the easily cuttable things. I'm doing the air quote thing now too. but the smart companies will double down on those things, and they'll realize that these folks are the key to delivering a great customer experience and building a loyal customer base and forestalling churn, which we all care about, especially into what might be a tough couple of years.
Yeah, can I also kind of like add to that? And it's almost like to turn the volume up on that, and the idea that if we know anything about economic cycles, is that they are temporary. Yeah. And if you layer on the top of that we are facing tight labor markets, and as Nick Webb said, kind of very succinctly, when I spoke to him a few weeks ago about kind of his latest book, he said, "Here's the thing. There's unemployed people and there's talented people. The problem is there's not a lot of unemployed, talented people, right? And so if you let people go who might be talented, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to replace them when you think that you've come through that dip. So it's that sort of thing around, are you playing a short game or are you playing a long game?"
Yeah, I think you're right. We for many years were asked by folks, how do I hire more challenger salespeople? And we say, well, the really good one, there aren't enough in the labor market who are looking for jobs that are not employed currently. And if they are, they're not going to be on free agents for very long. Most of the good ones are gainfully employed, doing quite well in the organizations they work for. And so unfortunately, you can't hire your way to victory. And so I would agree wholeheartedly with that statement. You've got to be very careful about letting folks go. It is an easy near-term decision. It is has painful long-term consequences.
Absolutely. So a couple other kind of questions. We talked about I explained to you about the punk CX questions, or the punk questions I've been asking at the end of every interview. So quickly, what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
So I struggle with 1 to 2 words. Just listen.
Well, I'll tell you what, you start talking and I'll distill 1 or 2 words out of it.
Perfect. Yeah. I love the concept. And as I told you when we were talking a bit ago, I think there's quite a lot that's analogous with Punk CX and that framework and that thinking with what we wrote about in the Effortless Experience. And people have said, what's the big lesson from the Effortless Experience? And I've said, stop assuming what customers want and reinforcing and propagating assumptions that were developed internally. So whether it's, well, of course, every customer wants to be delighted. Turns out customers want an easy experience more than they want a delightful experience. Well, of course, customers want a relationship with our people. It turns out they actually would prefer to do it themselves and not talk to you. Well, of course, customers want a consistent experience. Well, turns out your customers actually want a personalized, tailored experience. They don't really care if they call in one day and they get one type of experience and the next day and they get a different type, or that the person next door had a different type of experience with the same company. So, we've got to force ourselves to question these assumptions and stop. I think there's this deep irony in all the talk about customer centricity and the fact that it's most of what's done in the name of customer centricity is designed by people in an insular, inside the company fashion. And most of those assumptions, when you test them with data, are actually not true.
Yeah.
So.
And I have a quote for you about, so I've got 2 words that I've just picked out. Well, 2 words. One is effortless. I think because it has to be there because you wrote the effortless experience. That goes with that question. And the second is no assumptions, because it just sounds like a punk song.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but there's a saying about assumptions, right? That you make an ass out of you and me when you assume. And it's quite true. And if you look at what we do in the name of customer centricity, and it is largely a group of managers and executives sitting around a conference table with a whiteboard, sketching out things they assume customers want.
Yeah.
And again, when you actually put all of your assumptions aside and test rigorously with data, what you find is that a lot of those things are wrong, and that customers want, in fact, a much more simple set of things that are easier for you to achieve and are deliver a lot of clarity to you as an organization.
So I have a quote, because I collect the quotes here and there about assumptions, and it comes from Alan Alda, the MASH actor.
Yeah.
And he was given a commencement address to, I think it was his daughter's college, and you might have heard this before, but he said, assumptions are our windows on the world. We should clean them off every once in a while so we can see clearly.
Beautifully said. Very well said. Much better said than I did.
And I just love that. I was like, and you can say to people go, oh, and it's a fantastic little thing. So I throw that in because I hadn't thought about that one for a long time. So that's one of my favorite ones. So second thing, follow on bit from Punk CX was Punk XL, and it was about this idea about we need to start talking about what experience being a bigger game, more holistic, integrated, systemic sort of game, and we also, in order to do that, we need to think about what it means to lead. What is experienced leadership? What company or brand do you think is sort of setting the bar, is covering all the different domains, and is doing doing well? Who's standing out for you right now?
Well, I answer in 2 ways. One is from a research perspective. A number of years ago, when I was at CEB, we did ask that question in a survey: who do you think is best at delivering a great customer experience? What company comes to mind? And the number one answer, we did a word cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And the number one answer was can't think of one by a landslide. But there were a few others who made an appearance, and I would point to some companies like you hear Amazon, Apple come up regularly. I think that's for good reason. I don't think they're perfect, but I think they do a lot of things well, and I think they set a high bar for others in the market. But I'd say those companies come up all the time. You also get the high end brands of Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton, Nordstrom, Zappos, et cetera. But I think we're starting to see some companies in if you will, mainline companies actually start to get things together and do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
I give some props to, I ran a roundtable yesterday and I asked, who do you think delivers an effortless experience? What company comes to mind? And I had 15 attendees and 4 people mentioned Delta Airlines and had specific examples. You don't often hear of airlines making an appearance when you ask that question, and kudos to the team over there. And I would also say from personal experience, and haven't talked to others, I think Verizon, and again, another segment in wireless and mobile you don't hear a lot about. I think they've made some really great strides in the kind of experience they deliver is actually now approaching what you get from some of these world-class experience brands. And they're starting to break away from this legacy perception that all mobile carriers and all, telecoms are terrible at this. In the same way, Delta's kind of breaking that mold as well. So I'd give kudos to those brands for making some progress.
Nice. Thank you. So one final thing, because I think we can all recognize the world is in a funny place right now.
Yeah.
And if you read the news, it's like doom scrolling kind of all the time. And so I always try and finish I've decided that I'm going to finish all of these things by asking people, let's finish on a good news or a positive note, good news story or a positive note. So can you tell me one final thing, what's the most interesting, positive or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week?
Oh boy. You're right. It is a doomsday world out there. I am struggling with that one.
I'll tell you what then. I will kind of like, so I was kind of like in the office and I was kind of coming back and I just saw one thing because I had to go and pick something up. And then I came back here because I'm in a sort of studio studio at home in the home office and recording the podcast. And I saw this thing. I was walking past this parade of shops and there was like an old carpet showroom type thing, very small. I had a stack of carpet samples in the kind of the window, and there was a little puppy dog lying in the window on the top of this carpet dog. Got the sun in it, and I was like, "What a brilliant kind of cute image!" And so that was kind of the thing that kind of made my kind of I went, "Oh, that's nice, isn't that cool?"
I'll throw okay. So you've spurred my thinking here. I was stuck because I'm a big news junkie, and that's probably part of the reason I'm stuck. Not a lot to be happy about, but I am excited. We've got, I mentioned to you earlier, we got 4 kids and I'm excited about how excited they are to get back to school. And I think it was a hard couple of years for kids in school. And I think we're starting to turn the corner. You're right. The air quotes apply around the pandemic being over. It certainly isn't, but the enthusiasm they have, the excitement they have of getting back and seeing their friends and kind of continuing this slow walk back to normal or normalcy, I think is encouraging to see. So
awesome. That's brilliant. It's a kind of a positive note and a nice thing to think about. So lastly, Matt, can I just say thank you for the work that you do. Congratulations on the new book. And also thank you for spending your time and sharing your insight and your experience with us today. That's been awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. I appreciate the invite, and thank you for your leadership in the space and encouraging us all to be punk CXers. I love the concept. It spoke to me as soon as I saw it. But thank you for the invitation.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.